The music academy was alive with chatter and laughter. Students hurried through the hallways, carrying their instruments and music sheets, their voices echoing off the walls. It was a place full of talent, ambition, and sometimes a little bit of cruelty. Among all these young musicians, one boy sat quietly in the corner, almost invisible. He wasn't loud or flashy like some of the others. He didn't talk much, didn't boast about his skills, and his clothes were simple, worn from many days of use. But there was one thing that made him different. He loved music more than anything else. He spent hours every day at the piano, even when no one was watching. His fingers were not always perfect, and sometimes they stumbled over the keys, but he never stopped. Music was not just a hobby for him. It was a world where he felt alive, a place where he could forget the laughter and whispers that often followed him. Most students ignored him or laughed at him quietly. His old, battered piano seemed to symbolize what they thought of him: outdated, unimpressive, and unworthy of attention. One afternoon, the academy's common room was crowded. Students were showing off their latest performances, some confident, some nervous. The atmosphere was playful but competitive. Everyone wanted to impress the teachers and their peers. The boy was sitting at the back, watching silently. His eyes followed the fingers of others as they moved across their instruments, and a quiet longing filled him. He wanted to show what he could do, but fear and past ridicule held him back. Then one of the students, a tall boy with a loud voice and a sharp smile, noticed him. "Hey," the boy called out, pointing. "Why don't you play something for us? Come on, let's hear what that old piano can do." A few others laughed, nudging each other. The boy looked down at his hands. His heart beat faster, a mix of excitement and fear rushing through him. He had imagined this moment countless times, but in his imagination, no one was laughing. The tall boy's voice rang out again, louder this time. "Don't just sit there. Play, or are you too scared?" The crowd of students leaned in, curious and amused. Some whispered to each other, clearly expecting a poor performance that would make them laugh even more. The boy felt the weight of all eyes on him. It was uncomfortable, even painful, but he took a deep breath and stood up. His fingers brushed the keys nervously as he approached the piano. For a moment, the room was filled with silence, not from respect, but from anticipation. Everyone wanted to see the joke, to watch him fail. He could feel their eyes piercing him from every direction. His stomach twisted with anxiety, but deep inside there was a small flame of determination. He had practiced for this moment, even if no one knew it. Music was his secret. His way of expressing everything he could not say in words. He sat on the piano bench, adjusted the seat, and placed his fingers lightly on the keys. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to focus. The first note he played was soft, almost fragile, a simple sound that seemed too small for the room. The students snickered quietly, expecting the worst. He closed his eyes for a second, listening to the note echo in the hall. It was not perfect, but it was his, and it was honest. Then he played the second note, and the third. Slowly, a melody began to form, one that carried emotion and depth far beyond what anyone expected. His fingers moved with a quiet confidence now, almost as if they had a life of their own. Each note seemed to tell a story of struggle, of countless hours spent practicing alone, of dreams that refused to fade even when others laughed. The sound was gentle but powerful, soft but clear, filling the room in a way that made it hard to look away. The students' laughter began to fade. Whispers replaced it, low and uncertain. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. They hadn't expected this. None of them had imagined that the boy they had mocked so easily could play with such feeling. It was not just music. It was a message, one that spoke without words, reaching everyone in the room. Even those who had doubted him couldn't ignore it. The boy didn't look at them. He didn't need their approval. He only listened to the music he was creating, letting it guide his fingers, letting it tell the story that had lived inside him for so long. He could feel the notes vibrating under his hands, each one a small victory over fear and mockery. This was his moment, his chance to show that talent and dedication could never be measured by appearances or by the opinions of others. As he continued to play, his nervousness faded completely. The melody grew richer, more expressive, and more confident. He noticed the teachers watching him now, their eyes reflecting surprise and admiration. The students who had laughed earlier were silent, their faces showing disbelief. It was clear that they were witnessing something extraordinary, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. The boy reached the middle of his piece, and he played a note that seemed to float above the others, delicate yet striking. It was not planned, not rehearsed, but it fit perfectly, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. A hush fell over the crowd. The laughter had completely disappeared, replaced by awe. It was as if time had slowed, as if every heartbeat in the room had synchronized with the music. One note had changed everything. Even in the midst of all this attention, the boy stayed calm. He didn't smile or boast. He simply let the music continue, pouring all of his emotions into the melody. Each chord, each pause, each rise and fall of the notes carried a piece of him. The students watched in silence, some with their hands over their mouths, some with eyes wide in disbelief. They had come expecting a joke, but instead, they were seeing the truth of his talent. For him, the moment was more than just a performance. It was a statement, a quiet declaration that talent and hard work could not be dismissed or mocked. Every hour spent practicing alone, every time he had endured whispers and laughter, every moment of doubt had led to this point. And now, in front of everyone, he was no longer invisible. He was being heard, truly heard, in a way that went beyond appearances. When he finished the piece, he sat quietly for a moment, letting the last note linger in the air. The room was still. The students were stunned, the teachers impressed, and the boy himself felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He hadn't needed to prove anything to anyone, yet in this simple act of playing, he had shown more than words ever could. His music had spoken and it had been understood. The applause began softly, then grew louder. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, full of admiration and respect. Some of the students who had mocked him earlier approached cautiously, unsure what to say. The tall boy who had challenged him first looked at him with a new expression, one of recognition rather than ridicule. It was clear that things had changed. One performance, one note, had altered how everyone saw him, but for the boy, the applause was almost secondary. The real victory was the knowledge that he had faced fear and mockery and turned it into something beautiful. Music had given him courage when words could not, and he realized that he didn't need approval from others to continue his journey. He had discovered that the power of his passion was stronger than the laughter of his peers, and that realization would stay with him forever. As the room slowly returned to normal, students whispered among themselves, teachers nodded approvingly, and the boy packed up his music sheets. He walked out of the common room quietly, the echoes of his music still lingering in the hallways. He didn't look back with anger or triumph. He only carried with him the knowledge that his talent was real, and that sometimes all it took was a single note to change everything. That afternoon marked a turning point. It wasn't just about music or applause. It was about belief in oneself. The boy had been seen as an easy target, someone to laugh at, but he had transformed that expectation into an opportunity. And even though he didn't yet know what the future would hold, he felt ready. Ready to play, ready to face challenges, ready to let the world hear what he could do. Because for the first time, he knew that talent, dedication, and courage could speak louder than any joke, any laughter, or any doubt. And that knowledge gave him a quiet strength that would carry him far beyond the walls of the academy, one note at a time. After that day at the academy, the boy returned to his small practice room with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. His performance had surprised everyone, even himself. He had felt the eyes of the students on him, had heard the whispers of astonishment, and experienced the quiet admiration of the teachers. But now, alone in the room, he faced a new challenge: how to live up to the moment. The piano sat quietly in front of him, its keys gleaming softly under the light. It had been his companion for years, though old and worn, yet it had never failed him. Today it seemed to hum with pride, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. He ran his fingers over the keys gently, remembering the first note he had played during the challenge. That note had been simple, almost timid, but it had carried everything he felt inside. It had been the spark that changed how others saw him. He sat down on the piano bench, adjusted it slightly, and took a deep breath. The silence of the room was comforting now. There were no eyes watching, no laughter, no judgments, only the soft glow of the lamp and the familiar feel of the keys beneath his fingers. He began to play, starting slowly, letting his emotions guide each note. The melody was different now, richer, more confident. It was a story of quiet triumph, of small victories, of moments where doubt had almost won but had not as he played. He thought about the faces in the Academy's common room that day. He remembered the sneers, the whispers, and the laughter, but also the silence that followed the first few notes and the awe that came after. It had been a turning point, but he knew it was only the beginning. Music was not just about impressing others. It was about expressing himself, about turning emotions into something tangible that anyone could feel if they listened closely. Hours passed as he played, each note blending into the next. Sometimes his fingers stumbled, hitting a wrong key or losing rhythm for a moment, but he didn't stop. Every mistake was a lesson, every pause a chance to think and adjust. He realized that his earlier performance had been impressive, yes, but it had been just a glimpse of what he could really do. The real mastery, he understood, came from patience, persistence, and an openness to learn from every small failure. His mind wandered to the students who had mocked him. He didn't feel anger anymore, only curiosity. How would they react if they saw his true potential? How would they respond when they realized that the boy they had laughed at had a depth of talent they could not yet imagine? It wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen as he truly was, for the music he could create, not the image others had of him that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the room in warm orange light, he played a piece he had been working on for months. It was a complex composition, with sharp rises and soft falls, sudden bursts of energy and gentle, flowing moments. His fingers moved faster now, guided by instinct and feeling rather than just thought. The melody told a story of struggle and hope, of fear and courage, of quiet determination in the face of doubt. At one point, he paused and leaned back, listening to the final note linger in the air. The sound seemed to fill the room, wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He closed his eyes and let himself feel the music fully, letting it take him somewhere beyond the walls of the practice room, beyond the opinions of others, even beyond the academy itself. In that moment, he felt free. Music was no longer a challenge to impress or a tool to gain recognition. It was a companion, a teacher, a friend. The next day at the academy, whispers had already begun. Students talked quietly about his performance the day before. Some expressed surprise, some admiration, and a few couldn't hide their jealousy. The boy ignored them. He focused on his practice, on improving his technique, on exploring new melodies and harmonies. He knew that attention could be fleeting and that true growth came from dedication, not from praise. During lunch, a few students approached him. One of them, a girl who had often ignored him, asked softly, "Could you play that piece again sometime?" It was really amazing. He smiled faintly, nodding. He didn't need to boast. The music would speak for itself. And perhaps he realized, sharing it with others who genuinely appreciated it could be just as rewarding as performing in front of the entire academy. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's reputation slowly began to change. The students who had mocked him now looked at him with curiosity and respect. Some asked for tips, others for guidance on their own performances. Teachers started noticing him more often, praising his dedication and encouraging him to participate in advanced classes and competitions. He had always loved music, but now he also understood the power it held to change perceptions, to bridge gaps between people, to communicate what words could not. Yet, with recognition came new challenges. Some students still doubted him, whispering behind his back or making small jokes, testing his patience. But he had learned an important lesson from that first performance. The key was not to react to mockery with anger or fear, but to let his talent and dedication do the talking. Every time he played, every new note he learned, every melody he perfected was a quiet answer to those who doubted him, one afternoon. The academy announced a small informal concert for students to perform in front of a group of teachers and peers. The boy was encouraged to participate, though he felt a mix of excitement and nerves. He remembered the first time he had played in front of the group that had laughed at him. That memory, which had once caused fear, now gave him courage. He knew that fear was only temporary, but music was permanent. It left an impression that could never be taken away. When it was his turn to perform, he walked to the piano with calm confidence. His heart beat steadily, his hands poised above the keys. As he played, he felt the familiar connection, the flow of notes and emotions moving through him. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft, sometimes powerful, each note telling a story. This time there was no fear of mockery, only the joy of creation and the satisfaction of sharing it with others. The audience was captivated. Teachers nodded in approval, students listened in awe, and even those who had once doubted him leaned forward, unable to hide their astonishment. One note, simple yet full of emotion, seemed to echo through the room and linger in the minds of everyone listening. That single moment reminded the boy of the power of music and the importance of belief in oneself. He had faced ridicule and fear, and yet here he was, stronger, more confident, and ready to take on new challenges. After the performance, students approached him with admiration. Some asked questions about his techniques, others simply said, "That was beautiful." He smiled politely, responding with humility. He had learned that true talent did not need to be flaunted or boasted about. It spoke for itself, quietly but clearly, leaving a lasting impression on those who truly listened. Back in his practice room that evening, the boy reflected on the journey he had begun months ago. He realized that the first performance, the one that had started as a joke, had changed everything. Not because it had earned him praise, but because it had taught him the value of courage, persistence, and the quiet power of music. He had discovered that even a single note, played with sincerity and heart, could speak louder than words, louder than mockery, and louder than doubt. He spent hours practicing that night, exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythms, and letting his emotions guide him. Each piece he played was a step forward, a new story told through the piano. He knew that the journey would not always be easy, that there would still be challenges, doubt, and perhaps even more mockery. But he also knew that he had found something no one could take away: his talent, his courage, and his love for music. The boy's confidence grew not from the applause or recognition, but from knowing that he had the courage to face fear, to embrace mistakes, and to express himself fully. Each note he played was a reminder of his resilience and dedication. He realized that true success was not about impressing others, but about finding joy and purpose in one's craft, about creating something meaningful, and about never letting fear stop him from pursuing his dreams. In the quiet of the night, with the soft glow of the lamp and the worn keys under his fingers, he felt a sense of peace. Music had become more than just a skill. It had become a voice, a way to connect, and a source of strength. The journey that had started with a simple challenge, a joke played on him by others, had grown into a path of self-discovery, courage, and artistry. And he knew that this was only the beginning, because he had learned something essential. No matter what others said or thought, the music within him could not be silenced. Each note, each melody, each story he played was a testament to his perseverance and heart. And as long as he kept playing, he would continue to grow, to inspire, and to show that even in the face of doubt, one person's passion could create something truly extraordinary. The days after the informal concert passed in a blur of music and quiet reflection. The boy returned to his small practice room each day, sitting at the piano as if it were the only place in the world that truly understood him. The melodies he played were no longer just practice pieces or compositions. Assigned by teachers, they were his own emotions made audible. Stories drawn from moments of fear, hope, and quiet determination. He thought often about the students at the academy, about how some now looked at him differently. It was strange, even a little uncomfortable at first, to feel their admiration after years of being overlooked or laughed at. But the boy was learning something more important than recognition. He was learning how to carry himself with confidence, how to let his music do the talking instead of trying to respond to every whisper or snicker. One afternoon, the academy organized a small recital for the students, inviting not only the teachers but also a few local music enthusiasts from outside. The boy had been encouraged to perform, though he felt a quiet nervousness beneath his calm exterior. He remembered his first performance, the one that had started as a joke, and he thought about the long hours of practice since then. He knew that he had grown, but he also knew that true growth would be tested in moments like this, when it was his turn to perform. He walked to the piano with a steady but deliberate pace. The hall was brighter than usual, filled with eager faces and soft murmurs of anticipation. Some students whispered among themselves, curious and unsure of what to expect. He could feel the weight of their expectations, but he didn't let it distract him. He sat on the bench, adjusted his posture, and placed his fingers lightly on the keys. Just as he had countless times before in the quiet of his practice room, the first note rang out, soft and clear. Immediately, he felt a wave of calm wash over him. The audience, waiting for a moment of brilliance or perhaps a stumble, was silent. Every eye seemed to focus on him, yet he did not see them. He saw only the keys, the way his fingers moved, the melody unfolding beneath his hands. The music seemed to flow effortlessly, guided by something deeper than thought, a mix of emotion, intuition, and countless hours of patient practice. As he played, the boy began to feel the story of the piece take shape. It was not a simple tune. It had layers of emotion, sudden bursts of intensity, and delicate moments of softness. Each note reflected a piece of his journey, the ridicule he had endured, the quiet determination that kept him at the piano, the small victories that had built his confidence. The hall seemed to disappear around him. He was alone with his music, yet completely connected to everyone listening. The audience was captivated. The students who had once mocked him now leaned forward, their eyes wide, their expressions a mix of astonishment and admiration. Teachers nodded approvingly, their faces showing quiet pride in his growth. Even the visitors from outside seemed taken aback, clearly moved by the depth and sincerity of his performance. It was no longer about impressing them with technical skill alone. It was about conveying emotion, telling a story that anyone could feel if they truly listened. Halfway through the piece, he reached a particularly complex section. The notes climbed and fell rapidly, demanding precise timing and control. For a moment, his hands faltered, hesitating over a tricky chord. But instead of panicking, he took a slow, deep breath and let the music guide him. The hesitation became part of the expression, adding tension and drama to the melody. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in closer, completely absorbed. One note in particular, struck with perfect emotion, seemed to stop time in the room. It was as if the music itself had spoken, louder than any words could, and every listener felt it deep within. The boy continued, letting the music carry him. He played with confidence now, his fingers moving almost instinctively. Each chord seemed to echo a part of his life, the moments of fear, the small triumphs, the countless hours spent practicing alone. The melody rose and fell like waves on a vast ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, yet always purposeful. By the time he reached the final notes, he felt a sense of completion, as if he had poured every ounce of himself into the performance. When the last note faded into silence, the hall remained still for a heartbeat. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause erupted. It was loud, genuine, and heartfelt. The boy rose from the piano, a faint smile on his face, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. He didn't need to look at the audience to know he had succeeded. The music had spoken and it had been understood. After the recital, several students approached him. Some were shy, others excited, all wanting to know more about his technique, the way he practiced, the story behind the piece. He spoke with quiet humility, sharing bits of advice and encouragement, careful not to boast. He understood that his journey was personal, and while he could inspire others, he didn't need to seek their approval. The respect he received felt different now, earned not by chance, but by effort, patience, and courage. The teachers praised him in private, highlighting his ability to convey emotion and tell a story through music. They encouraged him to participate in larger competitions and to continue developing his skills. But more importantly, they recognized a quiet confidence that had grown within him, a sense of self-belief that no mockery or doubt could shake. This was the true transformation, one that went beyond applause or recognition. In the days that followed, the boy noticed subtle changes around the academy. Students who had previously ignored or ridiculed him now treated him with curiosity and respect. Some asked him to help with their own performances, others sought guidance on technique. It was not universal, of course. There were still whispers, still occasional doubt. But he had learned not to depend on the opinions of others. His focus remained on the music, on growth, and on expression. One afternoon, he sat alone in the practice room, thinking about how far he had come. The journey from being laughed at to being admired had been more than a change in how others saw him. It had been a transformation within himself. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. He had discovered that persistence, patience, and dedication could turn even the smallest opportunity into a turning point. And he had realized that music, more than anything, had the power to connect people, to express what words could not, and to change perceptions without a single spoken sentence. That evening, he played again, exploring a new composition he had been developing. The notes flowed naturally, reflecting his mood and thoughts, sometimes playful, sometimes intense, sometimes soft and tender. The music seemed to mirror his journey, the moments of doubt, the courage to continue, the joy of discovery. Each key he pressed was a reminder that he had control over his own path, that his effort and passion mattered more than the opinions of anyone else. The boy began to think about the future. Competitions, recitals, and opportunities to perform awaited him. But he also realized that the true value of music went beyond these events. Music was a way to express himself fully, to communicate emotions and stories that could touch others in ways words never could. And as he played, he felt a quiet determination to continue on this path, to explore every melody, to push his limits, and to never allow fear or ridicule to hold him back again. In those quiet moments alone at the piano, he understood something important. Talent alone was not enough. It required courage to share it, discipline to nurture it, and patience to grow it. He had been tested by mockery and doubt, but he had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of the true power of his gift. The music that flowed from his fingers was no longer just sound. It was a reflection of who he was, a voice that could not be silenced. As the night deepened and the lights dimmed, he played one final piece for himself, letting every emotion pour into the melody. It was a story of struggle and triumph, of fear faced and overcome, of a journey from doubt to self-belief. Each note lingered in the air, filling the room with echoes of determination and hope. And as the last sound faded, he leaned back, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. He had come far from the boy who was once laughed at, the one whose music had been seen as a joke. He had discovered that one note, one moment of courage, could change everything, not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. And he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of a journey that would continue, note by note, melody by melody, for the rest of his life. After the recital, the boy returned to his usual routine of practice, but now the atmosphere around him had shifted. The students who had once mocked him now regarded him with curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. Teachers offered gentle guidance and encouragement, recognizing his talent and dedication. Even though he had grown used to solitude, he began to notice small gestures of respect from people who had once dismissed him. One morning, a teacher approached him with a small smile. "There's a regional music competition coming up," she said quietly. "We think you should participate." The boy's heart skipped a beat. Competitions had always been intimidating. He had feared judgment, mistakes, and failure. But now, after all the hours of practice and the performances that had started to change perceptions, he felt a spark of excitement. This could be another opportunity to challenge himself, to see how far he had truly come. Over the next few weeks, he prepared diligently. Every day after classes, he would sit at the piano for hours, refining his pieces, correcting mistakes, and experimenting with new melodies. The music that came from him was no longer hesitant or uncertain. Each note carried confidence and clarity, each piece told a story. He could feel the music speaking not only to him but to those who would listen, conveying emotions that words could never fully express. The academy became a quieter place of observation. Students who had been skeptical now watched him with fascination. Some asked for advice, wanting to know the secret behind his dedication and skill. Others, more quietly, began to practice harder themselves, inspired by his focus and perseverance. The boy did not boast or seek attention. He simply let his music demonstrate his progress, allowing every performance, every note, to speak for him. On the day of the regional competition, the hall was packed with students, teachers, and visitors from other academies. The atmosphere was tense with excitement and nerves. He felt a familiar mix of fear and anticipation, but it was different now. The fear that had once paralyzed him had been replaced with a quiet determination. He remembered his first performance, the one that had begun as a joke. He thought of all the hours of practice, all the moments of doubt he had overcome. And he felt ready. When his turn came, he walked to the piano with calm focus. The room fell silent. He sat down, positioned his fingers, and began to play. The first notes floated softly, delicate and clear. Immediately, the audience was drawn in. This was not just skill. It was expression, emotion made tangible. The melody carried a story of struggle, courage, and quiet triumph. It spoke to the heart, and the listeners felt it deeply. As the piece progressed, he grew more confident. His fingers moved with precision, yet every note felt natural and alive. He added subtle variations, soft pauses, and flowing movements that made the melody unique. The audience, once ready to judge, was now completely absorbed. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, mouths slightly open in awe. Teachers nodded silently, appreciating the maturity and depth of his performance. Even the students who had doubted him before were captivated, unable to hide their astonishment. The climax of the piece arrived, a section filled with rapid runs and intricate chords. Many would have felt pressure, but he embraced it. The complexity of the music became a canvas for his emotions, expressing joy, tension, and determination all at once. His heart raced, but he let the rhythm guide him. Every note was precise, every pause intentional, every movement of his hands purposeful. For a moment, the audience forgot to breathe. Caught entirely in the world he was creating through music. Then came the final notes. They were soft yet full of meaning, lingering in the hall like whispers of a story just told. When the last sound faded, the silence hung for a brief second before the room erupted into applause. It was loud, sincere, and overwhelming. Some stood to clap, others wiped tears from their eyes, and many students exchanged astonished glances. The boy rose from the piano, feeling a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. Afterward, the judges and teachers approached him. They praised his technical skill, of course, but they were even more impressed by the emotional depth and expression in his performance. One judge, a musician of considerable reputation, said softly, "You have a rare gift. Not only can you play the piano, but you can make people feel the music in their hearts. That is what makes a true musician." The boy nodded, humbled but quietly proud. He realized that the recognition he received now was different from before. It was sincere, earned through effort and grounded in his passion. In the following days, students from other academies began to approach him, some shyly, some boldly, asking for tips and guidance. Invitations to perform at small local events started arriving. For the first time, he felt that his music could reach beyond the walls of the academy, that the melodies he had practiced tirelessly could touch people he had never met. Yet he remained grounded. He understood that his journey was not about fame or applause. It was about the love of music, the commitment to improvement, and the joy of creating something meaningful. At the academy, the atmosphere continued to change. The students who had once mocked him now treated him with respect, some with curiosity, and others with admiration. The teachers encouraged his growth, sometimes giving him advanced pieces to challenge his skills further. And through it all he remained focused, humble, and dedicated. He had learned that talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, courage, and sincerity were just as important. One afternoon, as he practiced in the quiet room, he thought back to the first day he had played for the students who laughed at him. That memory had once filled him with fear and doubt, but now it felt like a distant lesson, a turning point that had shaped his journey. He had faced ridicule and uncertainty, and through it he had discovered a quiet strength within himself. That strength had carried him to places he never imagined, and he knew it would continue to guide him. The boy's life began to revolve more and more around music, but not just as a skill to show others. It became a source of comfort, a way to express emotions that were difficult to put into words. Each piece he learned, each melody he created, was a reflection of his journey from the laughter of others to his own quiet confidence. He realized that the true value of music was not in recognition alone, but in the ability to touch hearts and inspire emotions in people who listened. As weeks passed, he began to notice subtle changes in the academy. Students were practicing harder, inspired by his dedication and focus. Some began to explore more complex compositions, others experimented with new styles. Even those who had once mocked him started to challenge themselves, motivated by the quiet example he set. The boy did not seek to inspire anyone. He simply focused on his music, and the example he set was enough. One evening, after a long day of practice, he stayed late in the quiet hall, playing softly for himself. The notes filled the empty space, creating a peaceful, almost magical atmosphere. He reflected on how far he had come, not only in skill, but in confidence, courage, and self-belief. The boy who had once been laughed at had grown into a musician capable of moving hearts. He understood that the journey was ongoing, that each performance, each new piece, was another step toward mastery and self-expression. The next day, he was approached by a student who had once been particularly harsh in mocking him. The student hesitated, then said quietly, I didn't believe you at first. But your music? It's incredible. I'm sorry for laughing before. The boy smiled gently, nodding. There was no need for resentment, no need for arguments. The recognition of effort, the acknowledgement of talent, was reward enough. It was a moment of closure, of understanding that growth could change perceptions and heal old wounds. From that point on, the boy's confidence grew steadily. He no longer feared judgment, and he no longer allowed doubts to control him. Each time he played, whether in front of a large audience or alone in the quiet of his practice room, he felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Music had become more than just a skill. It was a voice, a companion, and a source of strength that would guide him for years to come. He also began to share more openly with others. He helped fellow students with techniques, shared insights about rhythm and expression, and even composed small pieces that others could perform. He realized that part of being a musician was not just personal achievement, but also helping others grow, encouraging creativity, and spreading the joy of music. And through this sharing, he discovered a deeper sense of connection to the world around him. By the end of the term, his journey had inspired more than just recognition. It had sparked a change in the culture of the academy itself. Students were learning to respect effort, to appreciate skill, and to understand that talent could come from unexpected places. Teachers noted the difference and praised the subtle influence he had on his peers. And for the boy, the most important realization was that courage, persistence, and sincerity were stronger than mockery, stronger than doubt, and stronger than fear. As he sat at the piano one evening, playing a gentle, flowing melody, he reflected on everything that had brought him to this point. The journey had started with a single note, played in a moment of fear, intended as a joke. Yet that one note had changed everything. It had shown him the power of music, the strength of perseverance, and the importance of believing in oneself. The boy's life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. The Music Academy, once a place of fear and mockery, had become a stage for his growth, his confidence, and his talent. Every student who had laughed at him before now treated him with a mixture of respect and curiosity, and teachers admired his dedication and skill. Yet, even with all this recognition, he stayed humble. He knew that what mattered most was not the applause or approval of others, but the music itself, the journey of self-expression, and the courage to keep moving forward. One morning, a letter arrived from a prestigious music competition held in the city. The boy's eyes widened as he read the invitation. It was an opportunity unlike any he had encountered before, a chance to perform in front of an audience that included renowned musicians, critics, and music lovers from all over. His heart raced. Part of him felt fear. The thought of playing for such a distinguished crowd was intimidating. But another part of him felt excitement, a spark of determination. He remembered the first time he had played in the academy, the note that had changed everything, and he realized that he could face this challenge too. Over the next few weeks, he practiced tirelessly. Every morning, he arrived early at the academy, spending hours refining every detail of his performance. He experimented with new techniques, adjusted the timing of his notes, and poured emotion into every chord. Music had become more than just sound. It was a reflection of his life, his struggles, and his victories. Each practice session was a journey in itself, a chance to discover new depths in his talent, and new ways to express what he felt inside. The students at the academy watched in quiet awe. They had seen him grow from the boy who was laughed at into someone whose music commanded attention and respect. Some approached him for advice, eager to learn from his dedication, while others simply observed, inspired by his focus and discipline. Even those who had once mocked him seemed to understand, in their own way, that talent was built through patience and perseverance, not luck or chance. Finally, the day of the city competition arrived. The hall was enormous, filled with hundreds of people, their eyes fixed on the stage where the musicians would perform. The boy's nerves fluttered in his stomach, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself of everything he had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. He had faced ridicule, doubt, and hesitation before, and he had overcome it through practice, persistence, and passion. Today would be no different. When it was his turn, he walked to the piano with quiet confidence. The audience fell silent, waiting for the performance to begin. He sat on the bench, adjusted his posture, and let his fingers hover above the keys. Then, with a gentle touch, he played the first note. It was soft but precise, clear, and full of feeling. Immediately, the hall seemed to listen with bated breath. Every eye focused on him, every ear attuned to the music. And yet, he did not see the audience. He saw only the piano, only the notes, only the story he wanted to tell. The melody unfolded slowly at first, delicate and thoughtful. Each note carried a part of his journey, the fear he had felt, the mockery he had endured, the quiet determination that had driven him to practice day after day. As he continued, the music grew stronger, more confident, more alive. It was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, a story, a journey that everyone in the hall could feel. Some leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Halfway through the piece, the complexity increased. Rapid runs, intricate chords, and delicate transitions demanded complete focus and precision. The boy's fingers moved effortlessly, guided by hours of practice and the deep connection he felt with the music. There were moments of tension, moments where a single wrong note could disrupt the entire flow, but he embraced them. Every challenge became part of the expression, every note a reflection of the story he wanted to tell. And then came the moment he had dreamed of, the note that could change everything. He struck it with intention and emotion. It was a single, perfect note, simple in sound but profound in effect. The audience held their breath. In that instant, the music transcended technique, transcended skill. It became pure expression. The hall seemed to pause, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. Every person in the audience felt it, each in their own way. Some felt awe, some felt inspiration, some felt a deep emotional connection. That one note had the power to communicate what words never could. As he continued to play, the melody carried forward, rising and falling, soft and loud, energetic and gentle. It told stories of struggle, courage, hope, and triumph. The boy poured his entire heart into each note, leaving nothing behind. He was no longer nervous, no longer fearful. He was completely in the moment, completely one with the music. Every chord, every pause, every movement of his hands was deliberate, intentional, and filled with meaning. The audience was captivated. Students, teachers, Critics and visitors alike were drawn into the music, unable to look away or interrupt the flow. Some whispered to each other, amazed at the skill and emotion they were witnessing. Others simply sat quietly, letting the music reach them in ways that transcended explanation. And in the middle of it all, the boy felt a quiet joy. He realized that this was why he had practiced so tirelessly, why he had persevered despite mockery and doubt. Music was not just notes on a page, it was life itself, a way to connect, to communicate, and to inspire. As the piece neared its conclusion, he slowed the tempo, letting each final note linger in the air. They echoed softly, filling the hall with a gentle resonance that seemed to speak directly to every heart in the room. When the last sound faded, there was a pause, a moment of silence that felt almost sacred. Then the applause began. It was immediate, loud, and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and even wiping tears from their eyes. The boy rose from the piano, breathing deeply. His hands slightly trembling but his heart full. After the performance, the judges approached him. Their expressions were a mixture of admiration and amazement. They praised his technical skill, of course, but even more so, they admired the emotion, depth, and storytelling that flowed through every note. One judge, a musician of international repute, said quietly, "You have a rare gift. Not only can you play beautifully, but you can make people feel your music in their hearts. That is what makes a true artist." The boy nodded, humbled but quietly proud. He understood that recognition meant little compared to the joy of playing and the connection he had created with his audience. The experience was transformative. Invitations to perform at other events began to arrive. Teachers encouraged him to participate in larger competitions, and students sought his guidance in learning and performing. Yet despite the growing recognition and opportunities, he remained grounded. He knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, doubts, and moments of fear, but he had learned the most important lesson. Courage, persistence, and passion could overcome any obstacle. He returned to the academy with a sense of purpose. Students approached him, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and some who had once mocked him now offered quiet apologies or words of respect. He accepted these gestures with humility, understanding that true strength came not from revenge or proving others wrong, but from staying true to oneself and continuing to grow. Every note he played, every performance he gave, became a reminder of the journey he had traveled. From a boy laughed at to a musician whose music could touch hearts. That evening, as he practiced alone in the quiet hall, he reflected on how far he had come. The first note he had played as a joke had changed everything. It had transformed not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. He had learned that talent was only part of the story. Courage, determination, and passion were what truly shaped a person's path. Music had given him strength, confidence, and the ability to express emotions that words could never capture. He spent hours exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythms, and letting his emotions guide him. Each piece he played was a story, a journey, and a reflection of his growth. The boy realized that this was just the beginning. There were countless notes to play, countless stories to tell, and countless hearts to touch. And he knew that as long as he continued to follow his passion, nothing could stop him. The boy had become more than a musician. He had become a storyteller, a source of inspiration, and a reminder that even in the face of mockery, fear, or doubt, one person's dedication and courage could change everything. He understood that the journey was not about fame, recognition, or awards. It was about the joy of creation, the connection with others through music, and the courage to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. As he sat at the piano one last time that evening, playing a gentle, flowing melody, he smiled softly. He had come far from the boy who had once been laughed at. He had discovered that one note, played with sincerity and courage, could indeed change the course of a life. And now, with countless notes still ahead, he felt ready for whatever challenges, joys, and opportunities lay ahead, because he had learned the greatest lesson of all: music, when played with heart and courage, could transform not only the lives of those who listened, but the life of the one who played it. And Fr.